My name is Tal Kitron with Appleroot Tutoring Services. I've been with the company for a little over 10 years in a bunch of different capacities. My current role is primarily of online tutor, so full-time tutoring ACT, SAT, PSAT, LSAT, and a few other subjects and tests. But today we're going to talk a little bit about just this time of year and how, especially in the 6th to 8th grade middle school realm, it can be really exhausting, and just some tools for how we can break through what some are calling this mid-semester slump. And so we've done presentations this week also for college students and high school students, because this time of year just tends to be a challenge no matter what education level we're at. And it's just going to be really hard for students to find motivation to draw upon. It can be very easy for them to just become overwhelmed. So I'm seeing that a lot in my students, both high school and middle school. So some of the things we're going to look at today is where, how, and why we're struggling. And of course, everyone's different. We have a different motivational profile and things that we have different sets of skills and challenges. But some patterns we see are in task initiation, persistence, and completion, which is the first part of this presentation. And a lot of those challenges emerge in these middle school years. They sometimes don't present as dramatically until high school or beyond, but a lot of times this is where it's starting. The students are getting a little bit lost in math or a certain subject, and it often happens right in this realm, from what I can tell, 6th to 8th grade. So the first thing is going to be thinking about how we think and what is and maybe what is not working very well for us. That's called metacognition. The 3 stages of getting things done: initiation, persistence, completion. We're of course going to start with the first one, initiation. Some students really just are fine starting tasks. They can sit down and just get going on it. They might have issues later on completing it or persisting through the task. Others, though, I've had this in the past, of just really procrastinating, avoiding, delaying starting an assignment or studying for a test, even though they know maybe they should. And that first, the beginning, of course, is a really important phase, right? That's the kickstart. So we got to think about, what are we actually dealing with? So procrastination can take a lot of different forms, right? We may just be getting distracted by phone or TV or what have you, or friends. It may be a lack of motivation, right? Just complacency, or it could be about structure, so disorganization, which relates to executive function. What we see here is some more reasons that students might procrastinate or might just put off starting a major task. You see lack of motivation, lack of interest. We're going to talk about tying outcomes to values. It's a very difficult but important thing to do. I think procrastination and issues with task initiation a lot of times have to do with fear of failure. So I don't know, I'm not sure I can successfully do this. I'm worried about what the teacher will think. And so I don't even want to start it because I have these things kind of built up and worries or concerns. So I think as an executive function coach, what I would try to do with a student like this is try to build that self-belief up, right? Give them some success, show them that we can improve. We can just partialize these successes to create a system that works for that student. A few other things. A lot of students, like I said, are just feeling overwhelmed, which could be just a bunch of things. But we're going to talk about executive functioning on the next couple slides. Perfectionism, fear of failure. Sometimes really bright students are actually almost self-handicapping. So they're thinking, man, this stuff is easy for me. I'm going to do better. I'm going to actually, I know that I'm at my best, between midnight and 2 a.m. That's usually a fallacy, but some students really do want to wait until the last minute because they think that's when they're at their best. We want to work on decoding language. So I'll hear a lot of times, I'm bad at math, or math is stupid, SAT is stupid, it's a waste of time, who cares? What that often reflects is actually just a lack of skill or just a bit of, again, a fear of failure. We are better at what we like and vice versa, usually at all ages, Especially in middle school, you'll see students just avoiding things that they don't feel as confident with or as comfortable with. So if we as parents or as teachers or as mentors or as coaches or tutors can give them these skills and mastery experiences, that can go do wonders in just building self-confidence and laying the path for more experiences like that down the road. And again, it can be tough, like at this age, coming from mom or dad, but I think that providing the structural support is not only okay, it's important. Executive function skills, which involve all these things, we'll come back to in a second, are a spectrum. So they may be lacking in one student at this age, and that person might really have trouble regulating their emotions or regulating themselves when they're hard at work or should be hard at work. So we might need help with that. We might need help laying out a calendar and managing schedule and organizing homework, right? So definitely good to provide that structural support because students may not understand, especially coming into middle school, that they need to do that or how to do it. And these are what we mean when we talk about EF, executive function skills. So the pillars are at the bottom there of memory, mental adaptability, and then self-control. And within those pillars, there's all these things of planning, prioritizing, inhibition, time management, et cetera. These are skills that we each have in our own unique balance. So someone who's very, very good at planning may not be as good at self-monitoring or vice versa. These are also skills that develop over time. So even into young middle adulthood, no matter what you do, these skills are going to improve, but they can also be honed in on and improved through coaching, right? Much more efficiently. On this slide, the only thing that I point out is the one at the bottom, which is metacognition I mentioned. This is how we think, the way we think about how we think. If you can really diagnose, man, I'm late, I'm always late, I'm not punctual, I have trouble getting places on time. If we think about why that is, we have a better chance at diagnosing and then correcting that deficit, right? So if you are able to access better metacognition and work on that, that can make all these other EF skills a lot more accessible too. You'll become better at all of them. And then it's just something that I think is interesting from a teacher's perspective, parents as well, but sometimes lack of motivation isn't really that. So you see a student who seems like they don't care. It's often actually just not that lack of will, but really a lack of skill, right? Feeling like, man, I'm a bit lost in this pre-calculus class, or I'm a little bit lost in this, maybe it's finite math, right? So if as a teacher or a coach, we can give them some strategies and a few successes, hey, you do actually know triangles quite well. Oh, look at how you did with this aspect of probability. You know this type of question, let's build off that. That builds confidence, it builds motivation, and that breeds success. As a tutor, I'm big on questions, right? I always want to put the ball in the student's court. It not only shows that their ideas and insights matter, because they do, but it also builds respect and trust, shows that I trust them. And really that gives the student agency. To succeed on a test, you got to put an effort and think about the way the test writers operate. So I can't do that for them. I don't want to be a guru. I want to just be someone who leads them into the strategies that are ideal. So yeah, what ideas do you have? How should we start this? What do you think you might struggle with? And that usually takes us on a path of discovery. If we're working towards a test, whether that's a standardized test or maybe just something coming up towards the end of the semester, you want to think about like, okay, I've got this project due end of April. Let's plan backwards from that. Think about all the steps in there, right? What resources will I need? Do I need to go to office hours? Can I create a buffer zone so that I'm not finishing right when it's due? What support might I have to call upon, right? When should I start and when should I have these certain benchmark goals? That's not something a lot of people do, especially middle school, but can really set you up for success beyond in high school and in college. So then some folks, whether we struggle or not with the initiation, we get that task started, right, sooner or later. And then some folks struggle with the middle part, the task persistence. This usually comes down to your environment. So making sure that we are organized, that we are structured both in our physical space, but also digitally. You don't want to have like a million emails in your inbox or a bunch of notifications on your phone every time you open it. If you can create structure at a macro level, so meaning you've just kind of got like, okay, I've got my basics of this is what time I wake up for class, this is what time I have my break, this is what time I do my assignment. Just that alone can help with structure at the micro level, and then it helps you with each class and each assignment, et cetera. So that's where coaching comes into play, is you can really help set that system up. And if we have this more disciplined environment, the goal is actually to make things easier on yourself. We don't want to rely on our own willpower to persist through a task. We want to just say, okay, I'm in my work mode, in my zone. Of course, I'm going to do this work. Makes it easier to do and make the right choice. It is good to have a regular study area while acknowledging that sometimes if you're hitting a wall, there's certain, maybe you want to switch it up, right? So maybe like you feel like, okay, well, my desk is at home is great for history class and English, but for math, for whatever reason, it doesn't work. So maybe we need to change the scenery, right? So go with what feels good. Some people do great with chewing gum or listening to music. Big common denominator here is trying to either put your phone in airplane mode or somewhere away from where you're at, because that's the biggest distraction, right? No matter what the age, but especially middle school age, that's going to be the thing that draws upon our attention and distracts us from the work we're supposed to be getting done. Oftentimes students will share their screen. They'll have like 7,588 new emails in their inbox, which is stressful for me. I think for them, it's no big deal. But I'm a big proponent of managing our interface, making sure we don't have a bunch of notifications. We've deactivated the things that we can while we're supposed to work, or even while we're supposed to be sleeping. And so the idea behind this is make what is easy for you hard and make what's hard easy. So if you know that you're prone to wanting to play a video game, right, or log on to Snapchat or Instagram for a while after class or after school or on the weekends, if you got something else to get done, make that harder for yourself to access. And then metacognition wise, if planning is not an easy thing for you, think about how can we make it easier, right? This whole goal is actually to make your life easier. That's how you can get buy-in as a coach, but also sometimes as a parent, trying to help your student become a little bit more thoughtful and organized. The stopwatch lap function on most people's smartphone is a really important tool that's not used enough. I think it's also great to think about structuring break time. This is big for our college students who just have like, oh, final exam, and they don't schedule in breaks or time to actually decompress. But even starting in middle school, I think that's a good idea, is think about like, well, here's my time for leisure, right? I don't want to schedule in 4 hours of working on something straight because we'll reach a point of diminishing returns. So I think the hurdle there is if you work for an hour and you need to put something down, but you know that video games are what you get sucked into, maybe that's not what you can start, right? So manage that break and do something different, making it only 10, 15, 20 minutes rather than an hour break. Parents, but also executive function coaches, of course, can help students establish routines, making practice into habits. So like with exercise, right? If anyone's gone on a workout program, it's really hard at first. And then if you can get into it and get in the zone, it becomes automatic, right? It becomes a ritual, and then that makes the hard thing a lot easier. So that's what we're trying to do with really academics and things that are providing us with challenges in these 6th to 8th grade years. Third part of getting stuff done is task completion. So we started the task, we've gotten most of it done, but there's something just blocking us from putting the finishing touches on and turning it in. I mean, if you start the task and you do most of it, but you don't turn it in, well, we didn't finish the thing. So this is as important as the other tasks, the other parts of this, if not more. And I think with this, sometimes it comes down to perfectionism or fear of failure, but other times it's just not knowing who to ask for help or when or how. So we can teach students who to ask, how to ask, and then also recognizing when they have to. And societally, we're not very good at asking for help. So it's a difficult thing to coach. But it's important to know like who you can trust to ask and like what are the best settings to do that in, right? So this self-advocacy piece, I think, can go a long way towards dealing with any issues of task completion. And then we can also set deadlines. So of course, there's a deadline of, oh, paper's due on Friday, but creating a buffer zone and saying, I'm going to finish this by Wednesday would be great. If you can make that artificial deadline work in your head, then let's say something happens, we have an emergency on Wednesday and I don't finish it, I still got a day or two, right? So that buffer zone can be really helpful if we're not calibrating how much time it will take. And I think having a physical list is also a really nice thing for a lot of people. They just want to physically just cross it off. So we're going to write down the 5 most important tasks we need to get done, even if one of them is just building a calendar and installing Google Calendar in our phone. Once we've done it, we'll cross through that item, right? That feels good. It shows progress. And it often, again, will lead to just a snowball effect, more tasks that we're getting done. We're now going to switch for the next probably 20-ish minutes or so. We're going to talk more about motivation. We're going to also do this from the eyes, I think, of a coach or a tutor, which I am. But all this applies to parent-guardian relationship with your child. Or if you're just a student watching this, I think you can probably get a lot out of it as well. So we got to think about that every behavior is motivated by something. So like when I'm working with someone, I would think about, well, what's the motivator? What are our goals, short and long term? We always talk about that in session 1. Anxieties are usually what the first thing that comes to mind. Well, I'm anxious that I'm not going to get a score, I'm not going to get into college, or I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to get to the high school I want to get into. But if we can shift that into thinking about goals and dreams, that's often really positive. And I think that first meeting, right, building a rapport with a student is absolutely crucial. So it's really just, I don't have an agenda. I'm going to actively listen and say, what I'm hearing is, these are your goals and dreams, and this is your stress about it. And these are our current challenges. Is that right? Right. I want to make sure that they know that I'm working for them and with them. But even like if it was a parent talking to your child, of course, again, a lot of that might fall on deaf ears at this age. But I think building that connection, we're going to talk about relating and building that rapport can go a long way. Because everyone's different. We do want to try as much as we can to tie what we're doing to values. So if I'm thinking about a class and it's just, man, I don't like this teacher and I hate this subject, right? First, just acknowledging that that is a thing that happens. Like, oh yeah, I had a teacher like that, right? And how I dealt with it. But trying to figure out what is the motivational language this student speaks. How will getting an F in this class impact values, or how will getting an A or a B impact her values, right? The short answer might be not. But then if you think about, well, what are we trying to do with the next step in high school and college and beyond, then maybe we can figure out how this outcome actually is relevant or important, even if it's a subject that we're not passionate about. That approach as a teacher or coach needs to change based on the motivational profile of the individual student. It's not one size fits all here. And motivation is half the equation, if not more, to a successful outcome, right? We've got the skill, but do we have the will? We see this in the March Madness tournament every year, right? I'm still bitter about my Illinois team's loss, but they had the skill and arguably maybe not the will to succeed, right? So the motivation part of it, sometimes you just need to unlock, and that can make huge differences. We touched on this, but a lack of motivation may not be all that is. It might actually cloak a skill deficit. So if we're falling behind in a math class, which is often what happens in maybe 7th, 8th grade, think about, oh, well, 6th grade, we were doing online partially because of COVID, and I didn't have a great teacher, and it switched halfway through the year. So it's okay that you don't have these skills. You were never properly taught them, right? Let's go back here and figure that out. Some students are dealing with undiagnosed or diagnosed learning differences, issues with processing or ADHD or dyslexia or working memory. Frustration is an important thing to build, but overly frustrated students tend to lose interest. And again, that lack of interest might be kind of a mask for something else that's going on. But if you talk to a student and you ask them questions, you can tend to get to the bottom of it pretty easily. Sometimes we have these tough issues of if they really don't care, right? It's just like, man, I don't care about how I do in this class. I just don't care about how I do on this paper or this class. It doesn't matter to me. So first thing is meeting them where they are, validate that. Yeah, it really, like, sometimes I'll say it even about the ACT or SAT. It really is silly. You're not going to use this years from now, but it's important for getting to college, right? These are these opportunities you want to unlock. That's how it's important to us. So there's got to be some sort of game or system of internal competitiveness showing us that I'm working towards something that I want, even if it's just a simple letter grade in a class. And this is probably the hardest part of all this, is when it's just feeling like, man, the student really doesn't care. So you have to really dig at that and think about, well, what do you care about? And try to slowly meld those together. That's a big challenge. But if you validate and you share experiences, then you'll build rapport, and that tends to work well. This middle school tends to be where this really starts to be a thing, the assistance dilemma. So how much support do I give my child, and how much do I let them kind of spread their wings and fly? And then all of a sudden we hit college, right? From high school to college is the big shift, where it's like, man, now we have that lack of support. It's all in the autonomy category. So we want to start thinking about that now and only provide support when necessary, right? So both as a coach and a teacher and a parent, we want to think about, do I really need to provide the support here, or do I want to let them build a little bit of frustration tolerance and improve on their own? This is what's called the zone of proximal development. And the theory here is you shouldn't step in to help until a student's almost failing, like really just nearly giving up. So what we do is we try a problem, right? We're building to the next thing, and just kind of asking questions. All right, what's our first step? If I lost you, where did I lose you? Do you have any ideas for what we can do next? And then if we totally hit a wall, maybe I'll throw in a hint. But then we'll immediately try another question to throw it back into the student's court. So this is what we mean by scaffolding. But if a student's super stuck and just can't do it, it's like, all right, let's try an easier version or a different version of this question. All right, I'm going to write this out. Here's how we do it. Let's leave it on the screen. All right, now use this to try the one we were just doing. Now I'm going to clear my screen and do the next one that's just like it. So now we've withdrawn the scaffold and shown the student they can do it on their own. That's really just the art of teaching. We want to set goals. I think a lot of students don't think too much about it. We want to be careful in the goals we set. They should be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. What we mean by that is you don't just want to say, I want to get an A, or I want to get straight A's, or I want to, ace this paper. It has to be more like, why don't we try to boost your score from a 72 to, let's say, a 78 by the end of next month, 80 mid-semester. If we can get like a low A in the exam, we can get 85 for the final grade. So we've broken it up into concrete, achievable tasks. And if we're getting some of those done or even approaching them, then that feels good, breeds more success down the road. So we want to set up these mastery experiences for students, because that's what tends to really build progress and confidence and EF skills. This is just a bit more on partialization, so kind of another look at that. So thinking about, well, to get an A on my paper, if I know that the 25th is the last day of office hours and it's due on the 27th, then I'm going to have these concrete steps where it's finishing by here, then draft my thesis by Friday, get that first draft done a full week and a half before the due date, and then peer review midweek so I can go to office hours if I need to. That makes big projects much more manageable. And it can be super overwhelming, especially if you've got 6 classes and 3 of them are assigning big projects at once, right? That starts to happen in middle school, really overwhelming. We've never dealt usually with work like that before. We can help these students with setting goals. So again, those short-term goals are helpful in making it appear less daunting, more manageable. And if we encourage students verbally to set their own goals, that tends to show or to result in increases in confidence, competence, and commitment to attain those very goals. This is about self-determination theory. So we want to, again, move from the support to the autonomy and promoting a student autonomy and independence. Giving a student choice is a powerful motivator. Sometimes I'll say, well, do you want to start with reading or writing or math today? And the student will say, I don't care. But I'll still ask, because sometimes they do have a really good idea of, well, I did this thing for practice. I want to start here. Very important. Empower the student. And if this tutoring or this coaching is all mom and dad's idea and the student doesn't really care or isn't on board, you got to get buy-in, right? So why, what can we do to make this an enjoyable experience? What is our goal? Even if it's just to satisfy mom and dad, how could we do that in the easiest way possible, right? And how can we do that without making you feel like you're suffering through or really grinding? So it's just about trying to meet them halfway. Sometimes if a student's having to start test prep super early because their parents want them to, the sell for them is, well, what if we can do 2 or 3 tests fresh or fall of junior year and be done with it completely? So that'd be a sell to a bright student who's not really ready for testing, but their parents want them to start. Well, what if we do really well and get this done? And then all of a sudden you don't have to worry about that for a year and a half of high school. So getting that buy-in, big time. And we want to almost never motivate with negativity. So fear, anxiety, or guilt, only as a last resort. And I mean, as a tutor, I would never use these. Even internally, you don't really want this self-talk, right? So you want to think about instead, what am I looking to get out of this? Not what am I afraid of happening? What am I anxious of? So you'll see a lot of this with standardized tests again. But as a teacher or parent, motivate not with fear, anxiety, or guilt, but with the possibility and curiosity and hope of success. Two kinds of motivation are intrinsic and extrinsic. What we want to try to do is make the work more intrinsically motivated. Easier said than done, but kind of want to trick the student into thinking they're playing a game against themselves, right? So that's part of teaching and coaching too, is turn it into some sort of game so that we can see, well, I'm playing this kind of competition versus myself. This is just a research project from many years ago. But what it shows is that high expectations are actually motivating. So when students were given this first draft back and it said, I'm just giving these comments for feedback, most of them did not rewrite the paper. But when they got the note back that said, I'm giving you these notes because I have high expectations and I know that you can reach them, that was enough to make most of those students say, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna revise it because this person believes in me, right? So that those high expectations within reason can be a good motivator. A couple more thoughts on motivation. So we have to worry about if intrinsic motivation is already present. I have many students who are super internally motivated. If you then decide to start with rewards but remove it, that might actually have the opposite effect. That can undermine the intrinsic motivation that's already present. So don't give a reward system for someone who's already motivated. But if they're not, then those rewards can stimulate behaviors which might then build that intrinsic motivation. So that's when you want to do that. If someone's not internally motivated, what are the rewards that will make them motivated? And I think specific, small, piecemeal rewards are good. So positive feedback, I'm huge on. I'm going to couch everything in positivity. Praise and recognition for even the smallest successes and affirmation and approval. I don't want to go like overboard with it and say, oh, you're an absolute genius, you're flawless, you're going to get a perfect score. That's insincere and also probably will have the reverse effect. But I do want to be overwhelmingly positive and make sure that I'm pointing out good progress where we see it. Even if the student thinks, oh, that's just a minor thing, right? That can be a huge win, and celebrate that. You do want to think about gradually extinguishing verbal rewards over time, right? So that kind of helps give the student more autonomy and has the student has the student owning and internalizing their own gains. We start with this, you did a great job. This is awesome. Do you see that? And then what I want my student to kind of show at the end is, oh yeah, I got this. I did a great job, right? They know it themselves and they own it. We can be really thorough and specific with praise. I think it's meaningful. So just, man, I know you're really busy at school. It's awesome you got this ACT work done. I really appreciate that. That's cool that you were able to do it. And I admire the way you were able to focus that whole way through and finish it. Right? People don't get that positive feedback internally or externally very much at all. So if we can give that some, it can really make a big difference for someone, right? Celebrating accomplishments. And again, we don't want to oversell, right? So if a student comes in saying, I'm bad at math, I hate math, I'm worthless at this, that may be their initial appraisal of themselves. I'm not trying to move them to, you're a genius, you know everything, right? I'm not going to tell them that, because that sets up for failure and probably damages my credibility. So we're trying to move to the middle, right? It's, well, you're not worthless at math. Let's see what are the things that you really don't like. Is it variables or fractions or square roots? Let's try kind of the first thing. Do you understand this rule? It's like, oh, you do get that. That's awesome. All right, well, what about this? Right. And then as soon as we reach something they don't know, then we learn it, right? We build that frustration tolerance, but also prove that we probably know more than we think. So recalibrating that self-appraisal is important. We want to focus on success approaching, not failure avoiding. So even though many of us end up in our parents' basement at some point, nothing wrong with that. But instead of motivating yourself with, well, I don't want to end up back in my hometown, my parents' basement. This is more of like a high school to college anxiety, I think. I want to end up at X university. It's much more beneficial, effective to go with the positive goal, approaching success. I want to get straight A's, right? That's a fine general goal. You just have to narrow it down and more specific as well. So you're always working towards this very specific, tangible goal, right? We want to be working towards something always. And I think sharing your own stories helps with rapport and relatedness and builds trust and respect. So, I'll tell students, like, if I'm coaching a middle school student and they're feeling overwhelmed because it's hard to make friends and there's a couple classes that are really stressful. I'll tell them about, well, in 6th grade, I moved from the US to Israel and back. So I spent a year in Israel for 6th grade. So imagine all this, but in a totally different language where the language goes right to left instead of left to right, right? And it's a whole different culture. And I don't say that to minimize their challenges and obstacles, rather to relate and say, man, there are like this is generational, right? This is a time of life that can be really challenging. You're not alone. Here's how I dealt with it, but I remember feeling really uncomfortable too. And then at that point, you're connected. We're already a collaborative. We're a collaborative, right? We're a team working together, and that's all it takes, is really just sharing a little bit of your own stories. As we near the end, I think one big thing to look at as a parent is, if you notice negative self-talk, ugh, I hate blank, or man, I never do well on blank. Trying to really change that. Sweeping statements are no good. They limit our belief in ourselves. So helping students recalibrate by being more specific, right? Well, really, you never do well? What about this time? Right? That black and white thinking is not going to be good for us. There's a lot of gray. And on that note, you don't want to be comparing yourself with others. This happens with test scores a lot, but I know it happens in middle school too, right? So we're focused on our own starting point, our own goals, our own progress, and trying to build a competition, but make it internal, not external, right? Trying not to compare with others, because that can be really discouraging and stressful, right? Even if that's not the reality. Sometimes people just kind of feel that everyone's moving more quickly than them, right? And they're falling behind, even if that's not the real case. So what this kind of comes back to is, yes, we're building frustration tolerance, but we're also really focusing on directing attention to gains and victories and the wins. Some students are really hesitant and they're like, well, yeah, I got this question right, but I'm not going to do it on test day, or like they're down on themselves. So we keep working on it. I'll say, well, let's do 2 or 3 more, right? Are you really sure that you're going to miss this? Right? It seems like you really know this information, and I want them to own that. We need to make sure that they really hear it, internalize it, or it won't really encode. So reinforce that positive affirmation early, often, always. And then last couple things about language. So thinking about attribution versus control, we want to focus on things we can control, like effort. SAT and ACT and PSAT are tests of effort. SSAT, to get into high school, test of effort, right? Yes, there are certain things we can learn about how the test is, but really it takes that time and energy and effort to do that, to look at practice and to think about what the test actually contains. But just always, what's the win here, right? Maybe if this week the only thing we did was you turned off notifications for emails and you installed a couple of screen time apps and you cleaned up your physical desk space. That's a great start. That's amazing. That's going to do, give us a lot of help down the road. And the language of possibility is also important. So if someone doesn't believe something's possible, it's probably not going to happen. So we have to enroll our students in the possibility, if not probability, of success. And then, get them to embrace this new reality, right? So no, you're not bad at math, right? Look at what we're doing here and look how far you've come in just a couple of weeks, right? So like, yes, it's definitely possible to improve. And some students come in thinking, oh, well, so-and-so college counselor thinks I can get this score, but I don't think that's possible. Sure it is, right? We have to think that it's possible, or we're definitely not going to get there. And setting high goals and lofty goals is a fine thing to do. We won't always achieve them, but working towards big goals, that's a good thing. And then again, as a coach, we want to think about language of commitment. So if I commit to giving my all every day and being a resource for you, and really thinking deeply and thoughtfully and hard about what works for you and what doesn't, will you commit to the same? Right now it's a commitment. It's about trust, respect, integrity, and that raises the stakes. That can be much, much harder from parent to student, right? But from a mentor or a tutor or coach, that might work really well. In my experience, it does. It's hard to just say if someone's generally optimistic, well, hey, you got to tone that down. Or if someone's a pessimist, it's like, well, you got to bring that up, be more positive. There's some good aspects to both. This is, prepare for the worst, but hope for the best. So we can concentrate on a positive outcome, but also at the same time, think about what obstacles may be in our way. So it's not, this is a problem for future me. It's what are the potential problems for future me? And how can I make sure that future me doesn't have to deal with those problems? Right? That's really just kind of looking out for future you rather than shifting the onus. These if-then statements can help with that. So, right, like more specific, if I know that I come home from school and I get distracted by TV, then I will wait to watch TV until after I finish my homework, as much as I hate that. That can be an effective substitute for thinking, right, and willpower, which we all know sometimes we lack willpower. So if we've got this if-then rule in place, then that might just put me on that path to doing my homework rather than having to work hard to convince myself not to watch TV. Right, so make what's easy hard and what's hard easy. A couple ways you can look at that is self-consequencing. So you can think about it, if I finish reading this chapter, then I can send a Snapchat or Instagram picture. Some people do better with punishments. If I don't finish reading this chapter, or a reward, if I do finish reading this chapter, right? So like, for me, it would always be better to do the one on the right. Until I finish this, I can't log into blah, blah. But again, different motivational profiles will require different strategies. And no matter what, you want to have this positive self-talk internally and from yourself to the student. Short term, it's like, nice, this is a big win. You finish another problem. Look at this progress. Cross another thing off that list. Yes. Longer term, right? So maybe it's like, oh, well, this class is draining me. I want to go down to the lower level of math. There's got to be ways we can convince ourselves to continue working. And there are certain times where you do want to throw in the towel and just say, okay, well, this class isn't for me. But usually in middle school, it's more about sticking with it, figuring out what your ultimate goal is, and just working with teacher and other students and whatever it takes to succeed. Right. So then if it's a longer term issue, then you want to think about what are your real goals and motivators. And motivation, last thing on that is that can really and does align with seeking a meaningful life. So when I'm talking with a student, talk about the purpose of work and school, right? Because it seems meaningless at times, and how our efforts may actually contribute to well-being of others. I read a book coming out of law school called Zen and the Art of Making a Living, which helped me really realize that I didn't want to practice law and that I wanted to be in education, among other things. But that's what happened, right? Is I got a job in education, I'm much happier, more motivated, and better at it, frankly. Right. So I think that's a great book for one, but also just an interesting thing for young students to be thinking about. Of course, maybe this picture is a bit overboard, but we don't want to deprive ourselves of frustration. Mistakes, I always tell students, this is a safe place to make mistakes, and those will teach us way more than successes, right? So we want to have these little obstacles. We want to deal with frustration, not get overwhelmed and get into this over frustration zone, but that optimal stress level where we're then thinking about and drawing upon past experiences to get through it. And then as a parent, so last bit here, we can use failure as a teaching tool, right? So not a punishment, but a teaching tool. So what happened here? What was the specific mistake you made, and what does it teach you, and what did you learn from it? And asking sincerely, right? Not like sternly, or like the answer should be obvious. Really thinking about it. Saying things like, if this is something you really want, then it's something you really have to work for, which can be like a dagger, but it can come off better from a teacher or a coach, but it's a fair statement, right? You need to put in the effort. I'm not going to give this to you, or I can't do it for you. So children at all ages really do need and benefit from honest and constructive feedback. Important to remember that. The students who do have frustration and overcome these struggles and setbacks usually build more resilience, which is really adaptability when you're faced with a challenge. And then those resilient students, Gumby style, can bounce back from the struggles and challenges that they'll inevitably face. So we're trying to build frustration to build resilience. And we all need that practice, having frustrations and setbacks. If we have that adversity in childhood, helps us develop the structures for handling it later in life. These mastery experiences over adversity can help us rewire so that next time it's not going to be, oh my God, this is happening, I can't do it. It's going to be, oh, I've seen this before. All right, let's figure out how to solve this problem. We need that practice falling down and getting it. And this is just more on that. Just showing that frustration is a good thing. Really hard to make that click, but it's part of a deliberate practice. It is definitely not a sign that you're on the wrong track at all. Mistakes are good, frustration's okay. It's how we work with that. That's it for what I've got today. So if we've got any questions, please put them in. We're also going to launch a poll. If you don't mind filling that out. What Appleruth offers is executive function coaching, which I've been talking about a lot. Starts with a mind print exam, which is basically like a mock test for the brain, incredibly cool. And then you can speak with someone at Appleruth to schedule a diagnostic. We also, of course, my bread and butter is test prep. We do APs and in-school tutoring. So that's what we offer. Very good company, although of course I'm biased. I'm gonna leave it open for questions for a couple minutes. You can also feel free to reach out to Appleruth directly with any questions you have. Any questions? So hopefully that means we're satisfied with what we've learned. Hope you guys had a good experience, and I appreciate you joining. Have a great rest of your evening.